Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're doing yet another PC-98 game, and that happens to be Edge. Yeah, that's right, just regular ass Edge. It's quite possibly the edgiest game ever made. Even more edgy than Shadow the Hedgehog combined with Chaos Legion. And if you pre-ordered this game back in the day, you are able to get a free character being Edge, the rated R superstar himself. Now that would be fucking awesome, but anyways though, yeah, the name is just hilarious to me. So the game was developed and published by TGL and was released in 1993, and it happens to be a side-scrolling beat-em-up. So first things first, let's get that short story out of the way. So apparently this game takes place in the 22nd century, and it's a futuristic cyberpunk world where the world has gone into ruin, but there are two big companies that now rule the world, being Fatty, that starts with a PH, in Hong Kong, and Tenkai in Tokyo. So apparently one of these companies stole something very important from one another, and now the main character that you're using named Kikumaru, and he gets visited by some girl named Rim. With a name like that, I guess she takes good rim jobs. Well, anyway, she tells him about some information, and then they end up wanting to just try and go get the shit back from one of these companies. Yeah, that's basically the best that I can get out of this one. And there's a lot of dialogue between the levels too, so yeah, obviously there's gonna be a lot more than what I just explained, but then again though, it's a side-scrolling beat-em-up. I don't expect the story to be anything mind-blowing anyways, so it works. So now, onto the gameplay. So like I said, it is a side-scrolling beat-em-up where you go from one end to the other end and you gotta beat up a bunch of bad guys. And at first, the bad guys that you fight kinda look like an army of Paul Phoenixes from Tekken, which is pretty crazy. And you can actually switch between the two characters by pressing the escape key. So Kikumaru ends up using the staff, while Rim ends up using like two knives. But to be honest, I kinda wanna just call these people Gambit and Sailor Moon because that's what they remind me of, and also their names are not really the most memorable to me. So both these characters actually have some special attacks that they can use by pressing the combination of buttons. So Gambit crashes the ground that hits both ends, and Sailor Moon does this like flying dash move, and I find that one has like a lot of range to it. But as awesome as these attacks are though, they can drain a bit of your health, so you gotta be careful on using them. And there's a couple power-ups that you can pick up, such as ones that gain your maximum amount of health, and there's a flying disc thing that just flies around and attacks enemies for a short time. Now the levels in this game may seem very simplistic at first, and they kinda remind me of something out of the game The Last Battle, or even the Ninja Warriors, but later on though, the levels actually do get a bit more intricate where there's different floors you gotta jump on and some other extra platforming. And at the end of each stage, as you would take a guess, there is a boss at the end of them, and my god, some of these bosses are like really fucking hard. But I'll get more into that later. So for now, let's get moving on to the game's controls, and the controls in this game are very simplistic to understand. So one button attacks and the other one blocks, and you jump by pressing the up key. And if you double tap left or right, then you can actually start sprinting in the game, and sometimes if you attack while sprinting, you can actually do a dash move, which is actually really useful. And in case you're wondering how you switch characters, you press the escape key and then press left or right to switch between the two, but unfortunately they both share the same health bar. So once you know that, then you're all set to go, but do the controls at least feel good? Do they feel okay? I would say it feels decent. Like, it feels a lot better than you'd expect it to be, but of course, it's not perfect. Like, moving around does feel a bit on the stiffer side, but it's not too bad. But the attacking and blocking is responsive though. And the hit detection is not too bad either. But one thing that can be a bit frustrating is that whenever enemies start attacking you, they can just keep comboing onto you, so you gotta make sure you gotta block, because that can be a real bitch. But the one plus side to this is that you can also do the same thing to the enemies too, so it's like a double-edged sword. And yes, I realize what I said is kind of a pun off the name of this game. So yeah, overall, I would say that the controls in this game are surprisingly decent. With the side of those two things that I mentioned, I would say that it's actually pretty playable. To put it in perspective, I think this game plays so much better than some of those PC-98 fighting games that I've played. So now, let's get moving on to the game's graphics, and the graphics in this game, I actually really like them, but I guess that comes as no surprise given that I'm a huge fan of PC-98 graphics. But I'd say it's mostly the cutscenes that look the best. Like, I think all of those look amazing, and they do have some pretty cool animation at certain spots too, which is really nice. But the in-game graphics though, I still think they look pretty good. Like, I do like the sprite work on most of the enemies, and I also do like the character designs as well. In fact, the animation on the main character sprites I do think are decently well done. There are certain attacks where it does look a little bit choppy, but for the most part, when it comes to like the running and the walk cycle, I think that part looks good. And of course, I do love the game's settings and backgrounds. I do think those actually look really good. So yeah, no surprise, I do really love the way this game looks. There's just some really cool aesthetics that it has. And hopefully one day we'll be able to see more indie games with this type of style. I'd love that. So now, moving on to the game's music. I think the game's music is pretty decent overall. Like, it does have some pretty cool songs that I do like, but I find most of them are just not the most memorable ever and are not the most catchiest, but they do fit the game well for that they do have a nice dark and edgy type of vibe to it. And probably my favorite songs on the OST would actually have to be the first two stages, but the rest of them, like I said, like, they're pretty good for what they are, but I wouldn't say it's like my top favorite PC-98 soundtracks. And if you wanted to go out and buy yourself a copy of this game, well, it comes as no surprise either that, yeah, I couldn't find any copies of it online. But I'm sure if you ever do see it around though, it's probably not going to be cheap. But I will say, it does have a pretty cool cover art though. So now, as for my overall thoughts on Edge on PC-98, is it really the edgiest game ever? Well, no, obviously it's not, but I do think there is one other game on PC-98 that would have been more appropriate if it was called Edge, but I'll take a look at that one whenever I do another PC-98 review. But more importantly, how do I overall think about this game? Well, to be honest, I actually think this game is pretty solid for what it is. It's not the most amazing and the most groundbreaking shit ever, obviously, but I actually did have some fun with it. Like, it controlled well enough, and I actually thought that the game was surprisingly kind of fun. I mean, it does have some, like, repetitiveness to it, like, it's very monotonous, like a lot of beat-em-ups are, but strangely, I was never bored with it. And it also helps that I like the game's aesthetics, but there is one thing that I haven't mentioned yet with this game is that my one problem is that this game is very difficult. Now, the stages themselves, for the most part, are not too bad until later on in the game. That's when they get a little bit more tougher, but for the most part, the stages are pretty manageable. Also, the stages are pretty short, so it doesn't take long to get back to where you were. Also, you have unlimited continues, which is awesome. But the main part about the difficulty is, like I said, the game's bosses can be a little bit on the ridiculous side. Even the first boss I actually found to be a real piece of shit. And a part of the reason is that not only is he just really aggressive, but also you don't really start out with that much health when you fight him, and he has way more than you, so it just feels really overwhelming, and I can easily see a lot of people just giving up on the first stages. In fact, when I first played this game, I gave up on the first stage because it was just really ridiculous, but over time though, I did try my best to try and learn this game as much as possible, and eventually I did it and I kicked Rob the Robot's ass. Even the second boss is a real bitch too, but thankfully I managed to take him out as well, and right after you beat him, you also have to make sure to jump over this platform, and if you don't, you die, and then you have to beat him all over again. But now that you know that, then now you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, the game's difficulty is pretty unforgiving at first, but like I said, thankfully you get unlimited continues, and once you kill those bosses, it really is satisfying. And even if you quit the game and then want to go back to it, you can still continue where you left off, so you don't have to like start all over from the very beginning of the game, unless you click new game of course. So yeah, for a beat 'em up on the PC-98, I actually think it's a pretty decent game that is somewhat enjoyable. And I would at the very least say that it is recommend trying if you do have a PC-98 emulator working. But as I said, just keep in mind that the game is pretty difficult at first, but if you manage to get through them though, then you might have some fun with it. Of course, it's no Streets of Rage 2, but I actually think it's good for what it is, and also with the hardware that it's on. So that's all I have to say about this edgy PC-98 game, so thanks for watching and commenting, and have yourselves a great day.
Death to all who oppose me!
Right, you piece of fucking pawn life. It's all over for you now. Eat shit and die!